Hello, welcome to Live at Loop. It's Tuesday. It's the first day of the week. The last countless numbers of weeks have been the same, and every day is the same. And so, with this very minor modification in my week, I'm already completely thrown off. So this is going to be complete chaos. Strap in. Hold on, everybody. It's Tuesday morning, and we're doing Live at Loop. It's the first day of the week. We missed this. I think I can get into it. I think I can get into it. We got to, but it might take us a little bit of a warm up. So, welcome. You're live at Loop. This is season 2. We're working on something called a Trak Packer. We'll show you a picture and we'll talk about what that is and where we're at with it. We're doing a process called Ship in 6, which is a sprint process. It's an iterative development process. It's an agile process, if you heard that word before. Joining me, I have Mr. Josh Polanski, our head of technology. David Blackburn, our execution lead. He will be whipping us into shape and reminding us how many weeks are in a 6-week sprint. And Jonathan McLean, new machine concept engineer who helped get this thing off the ground in season 1. I think he's here to share some of what he learned about the details that we've run into in the meantime. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into it. Let me share just a couple of things for if this is the first time you're joining us, or if you're watching on the archive and saying, I can't believe they were doing that 2 months ago and I never saw it. Well, here you are, you're watching, that's fine. To you in the future, we're making a Trak Packer. This is a really cool machine that can take in a lot of different types of products on the in feed. It can pack a lot of different case sizes. It has universal tooling and it can change over in seconds. That's because product companies need to be able to run shorter runs. They need to be able to feed different types of products at their different channels. They need to be able to, their production systems need to be able to package things that they hadn't thought of yet. And so this is the kind of machine that we feel like will be possible to do that. We're showing all this technology and how it can be used because we want to inspire people to do new and interesting things. I mentioned we're doing a ship in 6 process. If you want to find out more about that, check out our website, loop.team/story/ship-in-6. It's right there. And you can read why we think that's a cool process. So enough about me. Let's get at this cool machine. Josh, you did a demo for us. Seems like last week. That seems like a lifetime ago. Why don't you take us through what you've done so far and where you're at and what you learned?
Sure. So I had a bit of a lost week last week. I had some technical snafus, um, but I did manage to get some work done. One thing that we noticed in the pre-show, or some people noticed, was we've actually got a reasonable frame rate, which is pretty nice for sharing on screen. That's one of the things I worked on. It actually came up because I typically do work in parallels. We do most of our work in VMs. I've been using parallels for about a year now. Most of the people, though, use VMware, and we found that running this demo in VMware was extremely painful. So I did a little bit of investigation there and found some problems with the way the shadows were working. We had slightly too nice shadows for VMware.
I blame myself for that. That was
Oh
definitely
yeah,
my fault that the shadows were too nice.
yeah. So I backed up the shadows a little bit. It will now run in VMware. I turned off some lights because we had redundant lights from switching over to the new models. And between just a few little tweaks like that, we've got the frame rate up to something reasonable in parallels. And it's not great in VMware still, but I think it's good enough for our purposes right now.
Hey Josh, can you zoom in and show that pick area? Just kind of fill up the whole frame with that because I think that looks so cool, and I just want people to be able to see that. Yeah, look at that.
Mm-hmm.
That is really cool. So you've got the shuttle positions coming out of the controller, got the robot kinematics running. This was definitely hitting the cool unified picture, unified scene. I'd say even if we stopped this today, this is awesome progress, and you can really see how that stuff works together with the tooling. Man, that's cool looking.
Yeah, so I think that's looking great. These new shuttles in here, not being the stark white, I think looks really great. That was one of the updates. You might also notice that the screen fills up more. The model fills up more of the screen. I was just doing that quick before the show today for demo purposes. So
Mm-hmm.
not quite there yet, but that was a bunch of work. That was a bunch of the work I did in the last week or so. I also started working on some of the product modeling, and let me go
Cool.
add a few products. So you see it come in. I got one there. Let's add a few more. Let's just get a whole bunch.
In these trying times, we've found a way to create infinite toilet paper.
That's right. So they're just gonna go ahead and fall
Can you go
off.
up close to that? Yeah, what's happening there? What's explaining their
Sure.
tumbling?
What are we seeing? What is this magic?
What the heck is this?
Oh my goodness. Um,
Oh, what is that?
oh
Hold on.
man.
We
Oh
didn't
man.
we didn't want that much product variability. That's too much variability.
Well, hey, at least we know we can't handle it. Let's get rid of some of these.
Does your machine look like this?
Okay, let's get something reasonable. Well, not reasonable. Let me go ahead and add some smaller ones. So I think this is probably slightly more reasonable. Bigger, smaller, maybe let's go with a little bit wider. Whoop.
I have to know why they're tumbling. How are they tumbling?
So what is this tumbling? So basically what I decided was not really do physics, but I did want to get some amount of knowledge about the model. So what I decided to do was to use a couple of ray traces. Currently, it's not super accurate. You can kind of see them falling off a little bit early. They'll sort of fall through. But what I'm doing right now is I'm basically looking straight down in the product space to see if there's anything under it, and also looking straight sort of left into the conveyor. So what you'd see is once the product sees that there's nothing under its center of gravity, it'll start sliding down. And then once it sees that there's nothing holding it sort of up the other way from sliding, it'll start tumbling straight down.
Okay.
So I've just got a couple of ray traces that are saying like, hey, is there anything stopping me from going down? If not, then fall.
So you're just checking against the model. You're just doing like kind of rudimentary collision detection on the existence of model things there. Cool.
Right. Yeah. Um, I figured that sort of like the minimum we would probably want because we want to know sort of like how physically like you know how are the shuttles lining up to the infeed conveyor, and sort of get at least some idea of actually getting the line up. The other cool thing about this is that as they're falling down, I can now go through with the shuttles and say like, hey, I'm a shuttle. I'm here. Is there a product close enough for me with this rudimentary model that I could actually grab it and sort of pull it onto the shuttle? Um, so we'll go by. They'll sort of start sliding down. I figured it was sort of important to have some cutoff for when like it was reasonably contained, so that we knew if we missed them. Um, so that's where sort of the two constraints came from. One I wanted
Okay.
to see it fall down. One I wanted to see if we lost it. So I might add a little bit more in there to get some acceleration, just because like right now they just fall at well actually at a rate based on the frame rate. So I would want to fix that. The other thing is that currently they're just moving down the conveyor to fix speed, but that should really be tied to the conveyor on the PLC.
Uh-huh.
Um, and also the spacing I think should be tied to like some imaginary rails that are kind of pushing it along.
Something related to the product. Or yeah, the pitch. Yeah, the sorry, the fluid, the flighted thing.
Right.
Hmm.
So as far
Yeah,
as
I
the
mean,
conveyor is concerned, I do want to add a couple of things like that that'll help us see that a little better.
okay. And I would we'll talk about this towards the end of the show, but with a couple weeks left, I mean, do you feel like you're doing this because it's easier than kind of cheating and making fixed pathways for them to go down? Like, what was the thought there?
I do think this is easier than that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Um, this sort of rudimentary model I put together in probably an hour. And if I were to try to do this based on like shifting things around on the model and getting it to look right, I think that would actually there would be a lot more tweaking that I'd be doing to get it to like match up.
Okay.
Um, and I did want something that was sort of reactive based on what things are doing, so I could see, so I could actually like capture them onto the shuttles.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Um, so that's what's going on there. I think next step for this is I need to put some logic in the shuttles so that they can say like, oh, there's a product here, let me grab it and pull it on. And then similarly on the tines over here, I think that they should have some logic that says, oh, there's actually a product here and grab the product. So
Yeah. Great. I think that'll be really cool.
yeah. Yeah. Any thoughts on product or what's going on there? Product modeling.
My brain can't quite process. It looks like they're coming in randomly. Is that the case, or are they?
Yeah, that's just based on how I added them. I just added a bunch of them, and they sort of cycle through as they fall off.
Okay.
Yeah. Um,
And so getting them coming in consistently and changing its size and stuff like that. I mean, I don't
that
want to feature creep with a couple weeks left, but changing a slider where like the diameter is growing as, as the feet of them comes in. Actually, no, that wouldn't work at all.
yeah,
But
I don't know if you
yeah,
noticed. When I added these, I just came in here and you know did this a few times, and they're just getting sort of added on there. Really, there should be something that's creating them as they're coming in and
yeah, okay. Sorry, I'm
destroying them.
blocking your JavaScript here. It's right here.
Uh,
This part. Okay, cool.
no. um, yeah, so that'll be another thing. Once I get it actually connected to the conveyor, then I'll actually be able to do something like that. So
Okay,
that's that.
awesome.
So one thing I did notice that I think is worth talking about is you can see, when you look at it from this angle, it looks pretty good, and it's going fast. You can see them coming through. But the funny thing is that when I boot up, I typically actually run at about 50% speed. I have to manually turn it up. And what I noticed is that when I run at 50% speed, we actually have some overlap here in the shuttles. Um,
Mm-hmm.
this is something that we're going to need to resolve. Um, I can see a few ways of handling this. One would be changing the mechanics and cutting those off. I'm not sure what that does to the product coming in. Um, we can also change the minimum spacing between the shuttles. I haven't really dug into this enough to understand like what we
Hey,
have access to there.
hey, Josh, can you fill up the window with the overlap area? Just like show just all. Yeah, that.
Now let me slow
Thank
it
you.
down. So
Yeah, not. Yeah, and
um,
that's perfect. That's perfect. So you can really get an idea of these things. Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah.
So the shuttle carriages are designed so that the smallest product can sit side by side, but when you go around the inboard part of a curve, it brings the feet closer together, and so you can see them overlap there. And this is one of the benefits of not cutting metal before you have a really detailed model, is you learn stuff like this along the way.
Mhm.
So yeah, we were also talking about the possibility of let's space them out further on the curves versus when they're in the straights. Jonathan, you're joining us to maybe tell us what you learned about that.
Yeah. So Acropolis Track has a built-in collision avoidance for these type of moves, which are called elastic moves. The whole point is, so we try to avoid collisions like this.
It's right there on the tin, right there.
It's right there. Yeah, so I think what we're going to need to do here is actually get a more accurate model for the size of the shuttle, like for the actual dimensions, and that's going to help around the curves. There is a feature to where, like if you notice, this is really only a problem around the curves. On the straight segments, you can kind of tuck them in there really tightly, at least when the shuttles are empty and it's not a big deal. There is a variable option for the collision avoidance to where it'll use one set, the worst case scenario around the curves, and then once you
Hmm.
get in the straights, you can kind of tuck them in a little bit more. So I think we're going to have to look at utilizing something like that. Also, there is a function block that can be used to vary the shuttle size on the fly. So, for example, you're going to want to have different spacing based on what type of product is in there, based on your recipe. Because we could very
Hmm.
well have some sort of product that that's going to be larger in diameter, that's going to collide with itself before the shuttle would ever collide with another shuttle.
Hmm.
So there is that option as well, and that's going to have to be done, triggered by like a process point, something like that. So I think with the combination of those two solutions, I think we could really dial this in.
Yeah. Yeah, the product thing, having designed the fixture, the product is exactly the width of or sorry, the shuttle is exactly the width of the narrowest product. And even just like a half an inch more, even when they're super tight, like the bottles would be bumping into each other. So we'll definitely need both of those. And um, I think it would be a good idea to do both. So kind of tapering in, you could see if the we're not we're already cutting off the circle. Like if you look at that, if you were to look face down at the shuttle carriage, you'd see it's a circle, but then it's the sides are cut off. I think we also want to kind of narrow it so that when it's pointing in, it just wouldn't be possible for it to physically interfere. I don't think we lose that much friction, or there was some discussion about that, like whether we have enough capturing there. But I don't think that surface is necessarily the critical one. It's mostly just holding in the cradle due to gravity. And as long as there's something there for it to hold down against, I think it'd be nice. So I'll make a tweak to the CAD model. I think we should have something, because we'll certainly need to change the size based on the pitch, because already if there was a 4-inch product in there, it's like going to be hanging off an inch on each side. And I think that'd be a cool thing to show, an important thing to show, if we can work it in.
Sure.
It still looks really cool. I remember on some of the earlier versions of this concept, we had the rails pointing inward, and that was even worse because is like even more extreme kind of pinching effect. That's how they ended up getting flipped on the outside, and everything got kind of pointed out instead of shifting inward. Um,
Yeah, that's going to be something too we're going to have to consider when diverting, because then you invert the shuttle. You're
yeah,
going to have to be very careful about that type of spacing as well.
Mhm.
yeah, that's a great point. And when they come flying in, cool. Okay, great. Anything else on what we're learning along the way here, or do we want to talk about how to bring this thing in for a landing?
I would just make a comment. This is sort of a side comment that I this has been my first experience with the new map motion kernel, and I've actually been quite pleasantly surprised by how good it is. We've worked a lot with BNR's older kernel, and um, I would just say like the new one, it feels fully baked. It feels like all the stuff that I'd want there are there, with the exception of a couple of minor things that I think will be coming but aren't there. Like the I think gear and pause, where you can gear into a position, I think is not quite there yet. But we've got some workarounds for that. But yeah, I mean, I I've been doing the robot with structured text as
Hmm.
opposed to code, and that's actually been really nice. Yeah, the interface to that is really good. Um, so yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised with that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's one of those cases where we have such, or we, you, Josh, and our team has such skill with sort of it's this classic case of like, I know the old set of libraries so well. I've been using them for 10 years, and then, oh, here's this new API, here's this new way that we want to do things, and when is it going to get to the point where you could jump it over? It's sort of this like Objective C versus Swift kind of thing, where it's like, oh, we finally got the crusty old BNR engineers to use the new map motion APIs, and they're not in outright revolt, which is like huge success. So I give BNR credit for that. And yeah, I was excited to hear that too, because you don't want to get stranded in the old libraries when you have some critical feature request or some bug fix that's never going to happen. it's great to be onto the new stuff, and I'm glad we did this project as our forcing function or excuse to really dig in there. So yeah, props to BNR for doing that. And I'm still hoping to get that full color model in and get the lighting right. There's some things I see that I'm excited to do, and I hope maybe we'll have that for next week or maybe for the final show.
Cool.
Anybody else have a thought, or do we want to hand it over to Mr. Blackburn? Okay, David, what are you seeing? What are we doing?
This looks great. Just one last time to say that. So we're getting into the final couple of weeks. So what we really want to focus on is finishing, getting to a point where we are done and we don't have to keep going. We would love to keep going because it's great. But we want to be at a point where we are done with whatever we are doing. What we are doing can change, but being done must happen.
Thank
we
you so
must
much
be
for that.
done.
There must be, yeah, or some version of done.
Yes. So 2 weeks, we're going to push into a final demo. I think what's coming to gel in my mind is finishing up the product handling. One thing also making sure that what we have to distribute is very easy to use. Our first demo hit a couple of hitches on that when I tried to install it. There were a couple things that we needed to fix. And then also we talked last week about camera presets. I think that's something that feels very important to me, is making the demo a little bit easier to use as well, saying this is what I want to look at right now. And those three things feel the most important to me. We haven't discussed this yet, so is there any dissenting opinions that we want to talk about right now?
I just love that looming feeling of a deadline being like, we don't have time for anything except these two things, like these most important things. Like if we were going to do that well, if those things are going to be done well, like we need to stop adding new stuff. We need to hustle this thing to the finish. And if we hadn't really been if we hadn't had a sprint deadline where it's like pencils down, it can't be, oh, I just got it to work for the first time. They can't, that needs to be, we basically need to be at that point now. Which it makes me a little bit nervous, honestly, with the tumbling and the product in feed, like where it's at, given that we have a couple weeks left. And maybe that's due to timing, but I guess we don't have, that can't happen another couple times if we're going to have like nice looking products. The product should be like, that's just my feedback. And that, even of those three things, like having the products be correct is something that is to me really the most important thing. Like otherwise it just looks like the machine throws products everywhere, which wouldn't be a great demo. So yeah, I would just emphasize that. And I think it's a great testament to the sprint process where it's like, and I know Blackburn, we took some time away that you were expecting, so apologies on that misunderstanding. But yeah, it's definitely sprint to the finish and be done. Josh, do you have any thoughts on time or what finishing, that kind of thing?
I think that sounds reasonable. Yeah, I was a little cut off by the loss of a week that we talked about, but yeah. I think that's reasonable. Product is definitely the highest priority. Some of those other issues that we had with installs and demoability, I think, are resolved. So that should be better. Yeah. I see the product and maybe some cameras as camera positions as sort of the most important, personally.
Yeah, cool. Okay. Yeah, and I think also I'm glad you mentioned that, Josh, was just like the sort of unknowns, those things that you go into a sprint with the intention of, hey, we want to build these things, and then some of these things that you take for granted about, like, we're just going to make an installer and it's going to go to, like, that ended up taking like a good chunk of time. Like it wasn't possible to anticipate that. So we need to have scopes that are flexible enough to be like, hey, we made a unified model in 3 days, and then we spent 4 days working on like how we're going to get it deployed so that people can actually use it. Like that's normal for that to happen. And so anyway, I just point that out for people not used to working in, or maybe they're used to working in that way, but against fixed deadlines and fixed time and fixed scope. Like that's really brutal if you can't trade off based on what you're learning along the way. And Jonathan, thanks for coming in on that that API update. That's going to be really helpful, I think, to see that. Anything else to go? Anything else to wrap? Finish a few minutes early on our short week. Okay, cool. Join us next Tuesday. Looking forward to it. We'll be 1 week out from our final demo at that point, so you can see the intensity start to build and the scope hammer start to get heavier and more aggressive. So looking forward to talking to everybody next week. If you think this is cool, share it, get us on our LinkedIn, talk to us, criticize us, tell us what we're doing that's completely ridiculous and will never work. I welcome that feedback. Let's go fight about it and argue in the comments. So thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.